I'd like to welcome all of you today and thank you for coming to this very special U.S. avant-premiere screening and panel discussion of Home by Yann Arthus-Bertrand. My name is Shani Pure, and I'm the director of the Columbia Maison Française, and we are very honored to be hosting this very special event along with the Columbia Climate Center of the Earth Institute. I think that you'll find that this film will fundamentally alter your perspective on and your feelings about, which is equally important, I think we'll hear about this from the panelists, your feelings about our planet. Whether you know a lot or a little about the environmental challenges we face today, about the almost unimaginable costs that we will pay for our failure to act on climate change, this film will bring home to you both the tremendous beauty of Earth and its vulnerability. Today's screening is the first showing of Home in a U.S. cinema, and will be followed by a panel discussion of experts invited by the Columbia Climate Center, moderated by award-winning science writer and journalist David Berreby, who will in his turn introduce the other panelists. And I want to let you know also that there will be a free week of screenings, a week of free screenings at Village East Cinema starting on February 4th. A very special event, so I hope that you'll all encourage everyone you know to go and see the film for free at Village East Cinema. Before introducing Yann Arthus-Bertrand, I'd like to just quickly thank our sponsors for this event and for the film itself. I'd like, first of all, to thank Fresh PR and Jane Peck and everyone who worked with Yann and Jane to bring Home to Columbia. I'd like to thank Conservation International for providing financial support for today's event, and thank Le Pain Quotidien for its additional support. I'd like to recognize Denis Caro, one of the film's producers, and Armand Amar, who wrote the music for Home, both of whom are with us here today. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the PPR group for the major financial support it provided for the production of this film. And this support was key because the director, Yann Arthus-Bertrand, and producers Luc Besson and Denis Caro, from the beginning, conceived of Home as a gift to the public. They wanted it to be made available free of rights, on all media platforms all over the world on the same day, which is, I think, the first time this has ever happened. And even today, you can get a copy of the film on DVD, or you can download it from homethemovie.org and arrange a free screening in a university or school or church or synagogue or neighborhood center. 400 million people all over the world have seen this film, and Yann wants it to be seen by as many people as possible. Just before hearing Yann's introduction, we will hear a word from Laurent Claquin, who is the Senior Vice President for Corporate Social Responsibility with a PPR group, and he'll tell us a bit more about this very unique financing and distribution model for the film. Not quite yet, though. I wanted to, few housekeeping items. I wanted to ask you to please turn off your cell phones, let you know that there are exits in the back of the theater if you need to leave during the film or the discussion. And also you should have index cards on which you can write questions that will be collected. If you have questions for the director or for the panelists, these will be collected during the panel discussion. I'm going to just say a few words of introduction about Yann. And then we'll hear first from Laurent, and then Yann has agreed to introduce his film. So Yann is an internationally well-known French photographer, filmmaker, and environmentalist. He's perhaps best known for his best-selling book, The Earth from Above. And his trademark is aerial photography, and that is also what distinguishes this film, Home. All of the images were shot from the air in a visually stunning diversity of landscapes over 54 different countries at 120 different locations. And it was actually through photography that Yann initially discovered his calling as an environmentalist, an activist. And indeed, the core of his work today is about photographing the Earth's beauty, capturing it in pictures, and using these to raise awareness about the importance of preserving the Earth. Among other environmental initiatives, Yann created the Good Planet Foundation in 2005 to raise public awareness and develop sustainable solutions. And he also helped create Action Carbone, which helps companies and individuals calculate, reduce, and offset their greenhouse gas emissions. Yann was designated Goodwill Ambassador to the UN Environment Program in 2009, And this week he's launching 2011 as the Year of the Forest. He has produced a short film called Of Forests and Men. And there's also an accompanying book, and we're thankful to him for distributing those free to you today at the screening. And I just want to underline that this film as well, like Home, is available free of charge, free of rights, can be downloaded from goodplanet.org. And again, the idea is to make it available for free and have it seen as widely as possible. So I'd like to thank you for being here. Thank you for the gift of this beautiful film. And I will now turn over to Laurent Claquin.
Thank you, Chani. So my name is Laurent Claquin. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today at Columbia University. And I also want to say a special thank to Maison Française and also Columbia Climate Center for the warm welcome, the excellent organization, and also to make this exceptional event happen. So I was asked to say a few words about PPR and why we underwrote Home for 10 million euros. Actually, for those who don't know the company, PPR is the leading group of global brands operating in retail and luxury sectors, and brands like Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, Bottega Veneta, and also Puma, the sports lifestyle company. So for us, sustainability is an opportunity to invent, to create, and to innovate. It's also just a way to rethink our product and our services. And now, for more than a decade, we have developed a very strong and ambitious corporate social responsibility. Of course, we know we're just at the beginning of a long journey, but we're in for the long run. And we also know that we have a duty to act and also to improve our action, but we also have a duty to increase awareness and sustainability, because it touches everyone. We know we are in an era where everyone wants to make a difference, and that's why we have decided again to underwrite Home for 10 million euros. That financial contribution, actually, like Shani explained, allowed the movie to be free of distribution right, and then to enable everyone to have access to the movie and to discover the challenges that we face. So we strongly support Home New York's launch, and we hope that the momentum we see will continue and to spread to schools, universities, libraries, and homes all across America. Thank you for your attention, and enjoy the film.
Merci, mon petit Laurent. If you want to give something, you must also to have a gift. So we have the possibility to give. So thank you. With you, it will be no home. So thank you very much. It was a fantastic part of my life to do this movie. I learned a lot of things. I was carrying this movie for 20 years, working around the globe, and have the possibility to do the film I want to do. And have the possibility, this fantastic, to have to give the film free to everybody. So we have opened in a cinema in New York, because I have to say that the movie has been seen by 400 million people, something like that already. But in America, the gratuity of the movie was not very well understood. I don't know why, but it's why we decided ourselves to run the cinema, and I have to say that the people from East Village it was so very nice. They gave us a very special prize to have the cinema open free for 1 week. So if you like the movie, it's your movie, it's your story. Take the time to understand, because this movie is about the fantastic story of life on the earth. The fantastic story of our species, men. We are so clever. We invent so many things, like agriculture, like city. You will see the movie, and we'll speak after. J'ai parlé avec mon film. I spoke with my movie. OK. Je vous embrasse, et je vous aime, et bon film. Voilà. Ben voilà. What I want to say is that if I made this film this year, the end will be worst. Because the last year was very, very bad for climate change, the flood and everything the last year. You know that, everybody knows that. At the end of the movie is always a little bit, 2 minutes, 3 minutes silence, always.
Okay, I just want to explain, first of all, there are people with who will be collecting the cards that I hope you have all found and or been given, on which you can write questions. In the last 20 minutes or so of the panel, we'll be able to take those questions. And so please write your questions on those cards and give them to a person who will be very conspicuously collecting them. I'm going to, I hope, I'm going to just very quickly introduce the panel. I'm going to go down my list, and I just appreciate it if people would indicate who they are. You have the opportunity here today to hear from people whose work informs this film. I mean, I don't mean directly, but I mean it's the kind of work that lets us know what is going on, and also addresses the question of how and what we do about what's going on. It's too late to be a pessimist. Okay, but what do we do, and what can we do? One of our speakers is Gavin Schmidt, who is a climatologist at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and the co-author, along with Joshua Wolf, of Climate Change, Picturing the Science. And he's a contributing editor at realclimate.org. And these are both efforts to connect these impressions and this information and this urgency with a political discourse that, as we all know, as you have just alluded, is not always getting the message. We also have Sabine Marx, who is Associate Director of the Center for Research on Environmental Decisions at Columbia, who studies exactly these problems, how our studies of, how our perception and behavior react, not always in the way you'd expect, and not always in the way that is best in the long term, and what we can do about that. Shama Perveen is Associate Research Scientist at the Columbia Water Center, and she's worked extensively with water resource scientists in India, and her research interests include integrated and sustainable water resource management and policy, assessment of water resources, vulnerability at multiple scales, and industrial ecology. We've been looking at water and thinking about water throughout the film, and I think we'll have a lot of questions for her. Olivier Langrand is the Senior Vice President in International Government Relations at Conservation International. He's the author of The Definitive Guide to the Birds of Madagascar, and in his current job encourages governments to forge policies to promote harmony between people and nature. And Maria Uriarte is a plant communities and forest, works in plant communities and forest management. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Environmental Biology here at Columbia. And her research focuses on understanding the role that neighborhood interactions play in the assembly and composition of natural plant communities. And she's interested in tropical forests and in the factors that may influence plant community dynamics at various scales, and in forest management. So we have the opportunity here to hear from people who are working on many aspects of what we can do with this feeling that it's too late to be a pessimist, and why. So I would like to ask you each to comment, but since we're in New York City, and this is the New York premiere and the American premiere of the movie, I'd like to ask you perhaps to focus your comments on the fact that we are an urbanizing species, as is alluded to in the film. And in the film, we've seen images of cities as kind of the bad guy of the process. Cities that are overcrowded, that are receiving migrants who are unprepared and struggling. But it's often argued that cities are actually much greener than other ways of living on the planet. We here in New York, for example, 77% of the people in Manhattan do not own cars. They generally do a great many more things without consuming the kind of fossil fuels involved in lots of transportation. And I have even seen it argued that a colossal traffic jam of the sort you see in Lagos is actually long-term an incentive to do something other than drive. And so I would like to ask you to each comment about the relationship of cities in both a negative and perhaps a positive sense in terms of what we can do in response to things we've seen today. Perhaps we could just start with you, Maria, and go down. Okay.
So first, can you hear me okay?
You want to use mine?
Yeah. Okay, how about now? Okay. So one of the things that has been a big change in terms of urbanization from the patterns that we see now, over half of humanity is living in cities, is that the vast majority of growth that we expect in urban centers will occur in developing countries. So like the movie said, this is urbanization for survival, not for prosperity. I mean, the prosperity interpretation of migration in the past may be a historical luxury. But the one thing that has been highlighted a lot by conservationists is that this is actually a good thing because we expect that in the past, patterns of deforestation have been linked especially to rural communities. In fact, in the past 10 years, and we published a paper on this a few months ago, the patterns of deforestation are not linked to sort of extractive activities from rural communities, but they are linked, like the mover highlights, to patterns of agricultural export and not necessarily international export, but also national consumption in markets such as Brazil. So we shouldn't expect that the movement of people from, say, forested landscapes to cities will necessarily lead to reforestation. That said, I also want to put the positive spin on this, is that we hear a tremendous amount about deforestation globally and tropically, but there's also many areas, particular areas that are unsuitable for agriculture in many parts of the world that are being reforested. So there is also a happy ending. And I think for scientists, the key is to try to figure out how to manage lands in a way that makes this possible, and use lands that as the most productive, so that we can feed the people that are increasingly moving to urban areas.
Okay. Do we have a microphone? Are all our microphones working? Okay. Sabine?
Is this working? Yeah. Well, as David pointed out, my work focuses more on the communication of the aspects that we have seen and that scientists conduct research on, rather than the actual issues of climate change and point to which we've gotten with our Earth. So, and I don't know if urban or non-urban environments make a difference in terms of communication, and because the message about or the translation of scientific results about urban environments or rural environments needs to be heard by everybody, not just by people in urban environments. But if the majority of people will live in cities very soon, we need to make sure that people in cities hear our message. And that's when it becomes very important to know our audience, so that we address issues that matter to the people who can do something about the issues. And that's why I think it's very important to highlight the negative effects that cities can have, but at the same time highlighting the positive effects that cities can have, as David pointed out, with energy consumption can be much lower if people live more densely together. So in terms of communication of the scientific aspects, I think after having seen a movie like this, who can trump this? These are undoubtedly amazing, this amazing footage that can be used and it must be spread, both to urban and non-urban populations. And I think it's very important to frame these messages in a way that they resonate, and to highlight the negativity, but also to point out the positive, as the movie did in the very end. I would like to hand it over to the next speaker.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. One of the things that struck me watching the film was very much that there's a kind of underlying idea of balance which has been kind of thrown off with the evolution of the Industrial Revolution, essentially. And I think that's worth examining quite closely, because the balance that exists in nature and in climate is not a... It's not, I mean, you use the word harmony, and I know that comes up a lot, but actually I don't think it's terribly harmonious. I think it's a very dynamic balance. It's not the balance of, an upright stick kind of just like sitting there and one tiny little thing will knock it over. It's the balance of a boiling pot of water that's staying at the same temperature, but the whole thing is in turmoil. So the climate system itself is something that is very much a dynamic component to this, where everything is pushing against each other, is forming, is being destroyed, is coming back. And our impact on that is very different than our impact on resources. And when we link the two, I think we're making a slight confusion, because if somebody sees a forest, they see, if they're exploitative, they see a resource that can be used. Our impact on climate it has not become something because people think that it's a good idea to put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. They don't think it's a good idea to increase the amount of methane. These things are accidental. The chopping down of a forest is not accidental, it's deliberate. Whereas our impact on climate is a byproduct of many different dynamic components within our economy and within our industry and within our agriculture. And I think so. These are two different things that make it quite tricky to pass out how to deal with both in a sustainable way, because we have these contradictions. We have the contradiction between cities as a symbol of the ever-growing population, almost 7 billion people now, but also as emblems of how you can live efficiency. And contradictions along those ways inform all of the problems that we have. People using biofuels to replace oil, but then that is part of the despoilation of the tropical rainforest that you rightly decry. So we can't get away from all the different contradictions that we have in front of us, and I certainly don't have the answers to how we're going to move forward on that.
First of all, I would like to congratulate Yann for a lovely movie, excellent photography. I'm a geographer, so I like to see things in perspective, and Maria and I were talking about scale issues. It's interesting because if you look at an individual's point of view, the problem is complex. If you look at it from a coarser scale, the problem is still complex. So that is a constant challenge that we as researchers have to face. Most of my research now after joining Columbia University is centered on water stress in India, and most of the use that we have in that country is agricultural water use. But since the question is on cities, two things that the movie showed, which I would like to point upon, is the first one that you did not specifically say virtual water, but the concept was in there, where you say that to produce 1 kilogram of beef, we need about 30,000 kilograms of water. So, there's this Tony Allan from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, brought out this concept of virtual water, where he said that, if you're a water-stressed region, you should focus on what amount of water you're putting in, because the water that you're using in agriculture, it competes with the industrial use, domestic use. And so Jordan, you said, is shipping out as in terms of fruits, and this pen has water. So everything that we use day-to-day basis, this is a very strong concept, and many researchers all over the world, especially in Europe, is trying to do a lot of work on that. So I thought that was brilliant that the movie covered it. And I've spent quite a few years now researching on virtual water, and I still can't say that I have a solution to that, that it can solve most of the problems that India is facing. The second issue that I thought the movie touched upon, but it could have done more, but then in 2 hours, what more can you do, was when it comes to the question of cities, it's most of the research that we do nowadays is with regard to the corporations who are worried about their suppliers in developing economies which are already under water stress. So we do a lot of modeling and Bayesian modeling look at the climate variability. If a certain supplier faces water stress, then what are the possibilities for the retailers to close down or for supply disruption? So those are the things that one can look for, and these are some of the challenges that me and my colleagues at the Water Center are focusing right now. So when you talked about India's problems and the drying wells, that's like the key region where we do our research, and it is humbling to see that no matter what you do, the problem still lies. It still persists year after year. And we are doing our best. So hopefully people will have questions and I can answer them later on.
Great. Olivier?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I'm a conservationist and a conservation practitioner, so I tend to look at things in a very practical way. And to see more people in cities actually could create a huge conservation opportunities as long as we can establish new economic model where the natural capital is actually managed on the long run. Mm-hmm. So we have seen this that kind of things being established in a number of countries where peoples in cities are paying for good water, are paying for fire fuel, and are paying for getting the resources they need in cities, and they have to source out. So I think that's something that we need to build on, and establishing economic models where people in remote areas that are at the edge of natural areas are actually paid for maintaining these functioning ecosystems that are benefiting to people who are actually concentrating on urban areas. We have seen it in countries like Costa Rica, that was mentioned in the movie, but everybody says, oh yeah, Costa Rica, that's the Switzerland of Central America. So what is implemented in Costa Rica cannot be implemented elsewhere. We talked here in the movie also about another country, one of the poorest on the planet, which is Madagascar. And that kind of model, is implemented currently in Madagascar and starts yielding some very good results. So I think that, reestablishing an economic balance between those who can manage nature for the economic benefit and those who are eager to receive the benefit from these resources have to be, reestablished. I think that we haven't managed the natural capital. We have been using it. When we have been building the human-made capital, we have been building the human capital, with education, with health, and we have been consuming the natural capital and not managing it.
And so, and again, I think this is something maybe everyone can comment on. Why? Which addresses what we need to do, I suppose, in the sense. I mean, to some extent, as the film alluded to, the problem is one of the way we are organized to economically and politically, right? The fact that our actions here have an effect on Bangladesh and Greenland is easy to say, and it's easy to go home and vow to do more, and yet it's also easy to forget about it. It's almost as if, and perhaps Sabine can talk about this, that our minds are not organized to kind of perceive the scale that we need to perceive. And I wonder if that is or what it is that perhaps the people on the panel think we could do about that. Anyone can jump in, please. Maybe
I'll start off. I think you bring up this important point that what this movie does, it shows this interconnectedness of the world, so that our actions have an effect on the ice sheets in Greenland and also have an effect on water and sea level rise in Bangladesh and many other of the aspects that have been raised in the movie. And then you say, but at the same time we feel paralyzed, so what can I do? And I think very often when we see a movie like this, I don't think there is anything like as a movie like this, but maybe we should poll the audience, but I think it can also be extremely overwhelming, wondering like, well, this problem is huge, what can I do? And pointing out, I think the overwhelmedness, being overwhelmed at the end and going home and then being hit with some bad news about like your spouse being laid off or your child being sick and you forget. But I feel the imagery in this movie actually is really hard to forget. it's extremely powerful, and I almost feel like I've seen this movie now for the second time, and I feel like I'm craving to see this imagery again. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think these artistic interpretations of nature and of science and of scientific information can play an amazing role in kind of breaking this barrier of like, we have so many things to worry about, this finite pool of worry, as we call it in jargon, to break that and to keep a marker in our brain that will remind us every so often that we are connected, that there are things that need to be done in order to preserve this beautiful planet that we have.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have seen, some conservation achievements in the past 30 years, mm-hmm. but these conservation achievements have been slow for the reason that, conservation organizations like mine, for example, were actually preaching, people were already convinced, because we were talking about the biodiversity without, obviously mentioning the economic importance of biodiversity, the importance of biodiversity for human well-being. I think this is changing. I think in the past 5 years, many conservation organizations have integrated this human well-being dimension, and now are reaching out, are not anymore, talking to ministers of the environment. They are talking to the real ones, the real ministers, who are those who are making decisions. Mm-hmm. Ministers of finance, prime minister, head of states, mm-hmm. CEOs of companies, because then they present, what can be done, with biodiversity in the long run. Presenting the economic argument has been very powerful. We can't transform, every aspect of biodiversity into economic terms, but it's something that has made allowed us to make huge progress. And it was mentioned that we have less percent of marine areas that are currently under protection. And in the last Convention on Biological Diversity in Nagoya in October, 193 parties decided to ramp it up to 10% by 2020. Why is that? It's because, evidence of the importance of marine protected areas in fishing activities, in fisheries, in marine production has been presented. I think this is the kind of movie that should be presented to G8, G20, and to the Economic Forum in Davos, because these are the people who need to be convinced that the natural capital is essential for the future of human well-being.
I'd like to make one comment. The first one is artistic, and the second one is about one of the things that struck me about the movie is that we only saw poor people. When we went to look at cities, there was nobody living there, which of course is not true. And so, I didn't know if this was a deliberate attempt by the movie maker, or if this was something else, but at an emotional, one of the messages that conservation has always done, conservation is really a middle-class concern. And even though it affects people that are not middle class for the most part. And so it seems that the message was one that has been counter-mixed success, and we were talking about this before, whether it's a message that is trying to generate guilt or empathy. I'm not quite sure which one. But the point that I would like to make with this is that there are some things that we may have to accept. It may be true, and I've heard many ecologists say this, that the polar bear is gone. It's going to disappear. And some species that we really love that have become emblems of conservation are going to disappear, and that is okay. So accepting certain facts about what may happen may make it easier to digest the consequences of say, climate change or habitat loss. And perhaps, focus on the specific things that have to do with consumption, which still is the biggest driver of climate change, probably, and that is us, and there are things that we can do about changing our patterns of consumption. And perhaps, pick a favorite cause that you have, the conservation of a species that you like, or, some social cause, and just focus on that, because I think these problems are just too large for us. And then I also want to make a pitch for a talk that is happening tomorrow that has to do with the ways in which humans have managed to manage their resources, the natural resources, sustainably. Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize this year, will be talking at International Affairs. It's been cancelled. Oh, okay. Because of the weather. Okay, so forget about that.
It would have been great, though. Would have been.
So there are ways in which communities can work to manage resources sustainably. So I don't think we should necessarily go home feeling depressed and feeling like we need a gin and tonic.
Okay.
You know, how I can say that? You are here in America the model of the world. Everybody wants to live like you, who like us, Europeans. Don't forget that 7% of the population bring 50% of the gas and the green gas, 7%, 50%. When I'm born, we were close to 2 billion, more than 2. Today we are going to be 7 billion. And everybody wants to live like you. It's impossible. We live in a deny completely. We don't want to believe what we know. When you look at the numbers we put on the film, I remember when I was doing the editing, and I put the number, I said, I cannot say that, it's impossible. It's the end of the world. It's it's difficult to do a movie, to do, okay, we are going to the end of the world, the life we live now. I'm not a pessimistic guy at all, but we need a revolution. We don't need a politic revolution. We don't need a scientific revolution. We don't need a scientific revolution. We need a cultural and a spiritual revolution. Moral revolution. Are we going to live like that all the time? We cannot continue like that. It's something very difficult to accept that the way of life, or consuming the planet, is impossible. And we have to change this. This is so difficult. When you go in the street here, I was doing on the Broadway all the publicity to buy things. We cannot continue like that. We have to learn to live in a better way with less. It's not other solutions. I think so. And that's all. So it's easy, it's a naive and utopia, what I say, but it's not another solution. I think so.
Right. But I think what makes it particularly hard is, we see images from Tunisia or Egypt, and that's the kind of revolution we can understand. You understand the change you want to make. It's a crisis, and you make a stand, and you've accomplished something. But the kind of revolution that you're discussing, for example, meat, which you indited in the film, we'd have a much better prospects if we all became vegetarian. That's very difficult. That is not waving a flag on a barricade. That is changing what you do every single day. It's super hard for people. It's a different kind of revolution. But the reason I grabbed the mic also, besides saying that, is because we are going to try to take these questions you've been writing, and I wanted to announce that someone is collecting them, but I think that happened without me. So that's going to be imminent. I think it's about to happen. One person managed to get his message to us before everyone else, and his message was, we need petitions at all showings of home. We need to ask our president and representatives to end wars and direct efforts to save the earth. Okay, that's not a question, but I wanted to read it because it's hard. Are these in order? Okay. Okay. This question may have been based on the cancellation, I don't know, but this is someone who I guess has finally got hold of some scientists who can explain why it's so cold out, why this thing had to be canceled for snow, and yet there's global warming. So take it away.
It's winter time. I don't know if you noticed. Okay, so that was a flippant answer, but there's a real issue here. Climate change is it's like a chronic problem that we have. It's not an acute problem. It's not. I haven't fallen over and broken my arm, and I need immediate treatment to deal with the problem that I have. Climate change is like me, putting on a few pounds every year, and my doctor telling me, this is not good for you. That you have to change what you're doing. You have to change your energy inputs, and you have to change your energy outputs. And that's something that, you know what, do I have to deal with it today? Well, maybe I'll deal with it tomorrow, or next week, or the week after, or next year, or in 5 years' time. But in the meantime, the situation has got worse. And when we first started talking about climate change, 20 years ago, really, in public, we've had 2 of the warmest decades in recorded history, and possibly for thousands of years. Things are moving, but they're moving slowly. Climate change doesn't imply that weather will disappear. It doesn't imply that you will never have a cold winter. But on average, the winters are getting warmer. It's not the case that there will never be a wet and miserable summer. But on average, summers are getting warmer. It will never. It's not the case that there will never be a cold, expanse of ice in the Arctic. But on average, the ice is melting. Climate change is an average thing, and it's part of the problem in getting anybody to do anything about climate change is precisely that. It's a chronic problem. It's not an acute problem, and climate change isn't going to mean that you never have to wear winter boots. I'm sorry about that.
Anyone else want to take this up? I think, just parenthetically, I think the analogy to the obesity epidemic around the world is it is exactly the same kind of problem. It's people need to believe that the odds are that they will do worse over years and years and years, not that the next cheeseburger will kill them.
And I think the solution is very similar. In dealing with all of the tiny little decisions that we make every day under pressures that are very, very diverse, we're not always thinking about climate change. In the same way, we're not always thinking about how obese we're getting or how high our cholesterol is going. But there are things that you can do at a kind of playing field level that change the decision, the shape, the landscape on which you make those decisions. If, for instance, we paid a carbon tax that would, better price the externalities of using fossil fuel, people would choose not to do that more often without having to think about it every single 10 seconds. If meat was more expensive, I would eat more vegetables and my cholesterol would be lower without me having to think every day about what I should do in order to reduce my cholesterol. And so I think there's a lot of things that governments and cities and organizations and communities can put together that change that landscape, that make our choices more benign, even though we're not really thinking through every time we make one of those decisions what the consequences are going to be.
Just to put some labels on the things that Gavin just said, what your last point is we can change defaults. And we found in countries where organ donation is the default when you get your driver's license, you have to opt out in order to not be an organ donor. Participation rates in organ donation are in the 98%, whereas in countries like the United States, where you have to opt in order to an organ donor, participation rates are very low, in between 20 and 30%. So changing defaults, that's I think a recommendation that policy makers can actually take to heart. The other thing about putting on weight every year just a little more, we tend to think it's going to be easier. Next year there's going to be a great Weight Watch program that I can join, or there's going to be a magic pill that I can take, or my life situation will be less stressful and it will be easier to get control of my weight. And so we kind of discount the future. We think things are going to be easier in the future, so I'm not going to do them now because next year it's going to be easier. And so that's one of these other things that we need to point out to people. And I think another thing is you said change is difficult, but we have also great examples of where it actually hasn't been that difficult. When Mayor Bloomberg introduced the smoking ban in New York City, actually it wasn't that difficult, and most people like it better now. So very often we think we're going to be so unhappy if something is taken away from us, but if you ask people later, they say, actually we're better off. And that's that's a trick that our mind plays with us as well when we think about the future and how happy we will be, or how unhappy we will be.
Oh, that's great.
Well, change is difficult, but it's the only thing constant in life. One thing that Gavin said was the average situation. Speaking in terms of water, we have the averages, and then we have the highs, and the very lows and the very highs that we have to take into consideration. So if you look at the annual figures for water stress globally, it shows that some of the regions are under acute water stress, some of the regions not so much, but the analyses that we are doing, the modeling that we did for India, we used 100 years of precipitation and temperature data, the very highs and the very lows, and we found that, if you look at the average situation, the problem may not be so acute, but if you take the variability into consideration, the highs and the lows, the drought periods, when people could not take care of the water, and when they harvested the fossil water, that's the groundwater that the movie touched upon, that which is non-renewable, then the multi-year drought impact was actually much, much higher, and almost all of the country was under acute water stress. You don't have to wait until 2050 or 2030, and that was alarming for us. When we showed it to the Ministry of Water Resources in India, they were not surprised, but they were surprised too. I mean, we could not judge their reaction. To tell you a short story, which is very close to what I was doing when I was in India in 2003. We were involved in this massive project, $200 billion project in India, which was to interlink the surplus basins with the deficit basins. So all the calculations that everybody was doing was, this much of floods, is happening, so this basin is surplus, and basins in rivers which did not have floods, those are the deficit basins. So the hydrology was basically that what we call at the time arithmetical hydrology. It was said that all the water that flows out into the sea was actually wasteful. They forget that when the rivers flow out into the sea, they form marshes, mangroves, and the Ganges, Brahmaputra basins, they have floods, but then they form one of the largest mangroves on earth, the Sundarbans, and it thousands and thousands of species actually depend on those mangroves. So these are the small connections that we have to keep in mind, the ecosystem services from the time the water falls, the drop of water falls on the surface of earth to the time it flows out into the sea, the numerous accounts or the innumerable ecosystem services that water performs throughout its journey is what is important that we have to take into consideration. It's not just human use, industrial use, agricultural use, or livestock use, it's also the water that nature uses, which is important, that we have to take into analyses.
Right. Well, no?
Yeah, maybe one quick element. I think that we are seeing a lot of good things happening in different countries, to address the erosion of the natural capital. We've seen countries making great progress in managing their forests, in managing their water, in managing their biodiversity. But obviously, what we need now is to make this a kind of a generality, a kind of a modus operandi for everyone. And what we're looking is obviously champions within governments or champions within the private sector who can be really a global agent of change, taking the example of Costa Rica and making something that is applied across the board, taking the example of Madagascar and again, applying to other nations in Africa. And that's something we see emerging. We see the World Bank, going, and looking at what they can do in green economy, promoting the management of natural capital. We see individual countries like Norway that is funding, the RED, these reduced emission from deforestation and degradation that accounts for 20% of all the emission of CO2 in the atmosphere. And that has invested $1 billion in Indonesia to address deforestation, $500 million in Brazil, $250,000 in Guyana to address deforestation. So we need more of these champions. And we've seen also the private sector, and I think that the fact that PPR has sponsored this movie is a strong indication of the desire of the private sector to move out of the situation of being of the bad guy, promoting consumption, and being part of the solution. Just for your own information, for example, Disney is supporting the RED, reforestation, avoiding deforestation and and promoting reforestation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, together with Conservation International and the government of Congo. So it's these isolated cases need to become, the general rule. Mm-hmm. And for that, we need the heavyweights to engage very significantly. We need the World Bank, we need the EU, we need the US behind that kind of initiative.
Okay, another question from the audience was, someone was wondering why it took 2 years for the film to come to the United States after its premiere in France. Is this working? Try. Maybe we'll just, yeah.
Oh, the cinema business is quite difficult to break. So you do a movie, the movie is there, but you cannot trend cinema around the world to show your movie. So you need some people like Conservation International today to pay for this. And thank you to the Maison Française. I think, it's difficult for somebody to open a theater free to show a movie. And I was very naive to think, in some countries it was working very well, like in Germany, like in Greece, like in Turkey, in China. Last time the movie went to the third channel in prime time, so 200 million saw the movie. Wow. It was amazing because there's always somebody decide to do it because he have to do it. And in America, on n'a pas trouvé la bonne personne. We don't find the right man, the right person to do it, to show. And Fox, who had the movie free, don't put any money for promotion. They don't believe in the movie, so the movie stay in a placard inside the box. So it's why I'm fighting. But I think that the good country to show this movie. I think this movie is done for rich country. Last time we showed the movie in Bangladesh, and very funny because there was thousands of people looking at this movie in Bangladesh, I don't know what but it's difficult to, when we speak about meat, we speak about car, it's not a language for them, because in fact I remember one day when somebody told me he showed home one day in Congo, in Zaire, in Congo Kinshasa, and he said, it was a room and the guy said, okay, I'm living in Kinshasa, I'm young, I'm 20, in this country is no education, is corruption, is only our dream is America. And you are killing our dream. We're killing this. What you say, is that true? We kill the dream because the way we live here is not nice. It's not good for humanity. Okay, you know what I mean. It's not good for us, for future. So, voilà. So I don't know why. And j'espère que ça va mieux. I hope we can show this movie in all the city in America. Thank you very much to invite me today. Voilà. There's no copyright, so everybody can use it.
Okay, well, this question actually picks up very, very directly on that one then, and on your answer. The person said, the country is controlled by big business. The market rules here. How can you expect change? I suspect the panelists would not necessarily agree, but let's start with you.
It's not the bad people on one time, the bad petrol people, and the good people who are putting the petrol in the car. We are all responsible. We are not guilty, but we are responsible. It's very we have to understand that. I was very in France because PPR paid for the movie, and a lot of green people on the left side, you said, okay, this movie is paid by capitalists, there's no solutions, we have to change the world, we need the revolutions. But I think we have to work together. We have to work with the politics, we have to work with the big company, we have to work with everybody. And this is how I do, So, la solution. The solutions, I don't know.
Well, okay, I don't really have any solutions. But change is, I think, somewhat easier than people think. I mean, 100 years ago, New York City had an environmental problem that seemed to be insoluble. The problem was horses. Horses dying on the streets, horses shitting everywhere, or, feeding horses, housing horses, the smell coming from horse shit, the diseases that were spread by this, and people at the time said, "Oh my God, we're going to drown in horse manure. What are we going to do to fix this?" What happened was that in the space of less than 20 years, horses went from being the almost essential tool for running a city to being exiled to riding clubs in the countryside. And the reason is because the people who were suffering from the negative effects of the horse were also the people who were benefiting from the good effects. And so when something else came along that didn't have those problems, it has other problems, the motor car or the engine, they switched, and they switched very, very quickly. The same thing is likely to happen in the future. But the problem is now that the people who are suffering the bad effects are not the people who are suffering,
Right.
who are benefiting from the good effects.
Right.
Now, making those links, and that requires governments, it requires businesses, it requires people to make those links. And I think this movie is great because it does make those links in people's minds, in their motivation. Making those links makes it much easier for people to switch. And I think we've lived in a bubble that has insulated us from the bad effects of the choices that we make. But the world is becoming smaller in many respects. And we're no longer as insulated from those consequences as we may have been, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago. And so when things change, they can change very, very quickly. And I think, you know, sometimes we forget that. We forget that history has happened at very rapid rates in the past.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's just a thought.
That's a great point, though. I think sometimes that can be framed ideologically to be the sort of thing that Sabine was talking about, where people say, well, we'll solve it. We'll have a great technology. There'll be a magic pill. We'll put all the carbon dioxide in the ground, or we'll have cold fusion but I agree with you that the absence of a connection, that's great in the movie, the sense of a connection between what we're doing when we leave here and what's happening in these countries that are already affected is great. Someone wants to know about the possibility of some runaway warming, about Jim Hanson's Venus signature. Can someone address that?
Probably has to be me again. I apologize. I'll try and keep this one short. The film mentioned one potential amplifying feedback that can happen as the planet gets warmer, which is the release of methane and carbon dioxide from polar landscapes, where right now everything is frozen and there's not very much emission. This is something that scientists are clearly worried about. It's one of those known unknowns that we don't really know how fast this is going to happen. We don't know the extent to which it's going to happen. You know, it's one of those big uncertainties. But it's not quite the, you know, it's not quite the Venus scenario that people, I think, sometimes associate with it. The last time the planet was as warm as it is now in these regions was about 125,000 years ago. The levels of methane didn't rise very much. They rose a little bit, but really not very much. And we've already increased the amount of methane by more than a factor of 2 over those levels. It's a worry, but it isn't something that people are panicking over. It's something that needs to be monitored. It's something that needs to be looked at and researched. But it isn't something where, you know, people are running around thinking that it's imminently going to change everything. What do you mean? What is it?
The Venus signature?
Okay, Venus is a very warm planet. It's very warm because it's got an enormously strong greenhouse effect. That happened in Venus's history because the oceans boiled away, the water that was there boiled away, it got lost to space. And all of the carbon dioxide that we now, for instance, store in the oceans ends up being in the atmosphere. And so you have a very, very powerful greenhouse effect, which makes it, you know, the surface of Venus is something like 700 degrees centigrade. It's really, really very warm. We don't want to go there. But Venus is also a little bit closer to the sun. It's got a different planetary formation history than the Earth has. We have very little chance of actually ending up like Venus until the sun becomes a red giant sometime in the next 4 billion years. But you don't need to worry about turning into Venus to worry about the warming that we are predicting, even without any of these unknown feedbacks. The planet, on a business as usual scenario, by the end of this century will be warmer than it has been in certainly millions of years, maybe even tens of millions of years. It will be a planet that we do not recognize in many, many respects. And that is very scary. You don't need to talk about Venus to know that that is not something that we want to be doing.
Right, that's quite bad enough, yeah. Okay, someone has pointed out that Qatar is going to be a candidate for the World Cup in 2022, and could that opportunity for them in some way help to address some of their problems, their extreme behavior?
C'est à vous. C'est en français. Yes, the Qatar is going to be the World Cup, and they have a program where they're going to build some stadium. And this stadium, after the World Cup, can be démonté, I say,
taken down.
Taken out in a developing country, and they're going to do a lot of solar panels. And also, because I was very attacked in France, because I support this candidature of Qatar, because in fact I've not seen that they were I cannot speak English today. Sorry. You know, the World Cup usually is in summer. And Qatar, we have to do in winter time. For me, it was incredible to think that they're going to do the World Cup in summer. So in fact, it changed, and now they're going to do in winter time. Because the stadium was supposed to be air conditioner, you know.
Yeah.
So now they change. So okay. And I think it's a very, very rich country. In fact, the Qatar Foundation helped me for the movie, and I showed the movie one day to the Emir and his wife and all his family, 15 children. And everybody was looking at the movie. It was very private things, very nice. And at the end of the movie, first, when in the movies, and sometimes we say, okay, 2 billion people are using wood for fire. And he stopped with the TV. He said, okay, I'm going to give them gas. I said, yes, but they are 2 billions.
Wow.
And at the end, I told them, I have to tell you something very frankly, that you have le plus gros impact écologique du monde. You have the biggest impact on the world, you know. And the second is Abu Dhabi, and you are the double of Abu Dhabi, because they freeze the gas and they spend a lot of energy. And they told me yes, after they sent me a letter, thank you very much for your franchise. I say franchise.
Your frankness?
Frankness, and no news for the last 2 years from the Qatar. So I think they are so rich, they can see things, they can do things. But, you know, and in fact, you know, for the Dubai, I went to Dubai, you know, not on my name, because they refused me to film on Dubai, because they know I'm going to speak about, you know, it's not a good example. And I think that some can be good, and Abu Dhabi they are going to do a new city, completely ecologic city. I don't remember the name of the city, and because they're so rich, they can do things.
Yeah.
And at this time, they're doing nothing.
Well, if the World Cup can be moved from summer to winter, then rapid social change surely is possible. So we have the room for about 5 more minutes tops. So I'm going to ask each panelist to have something to say to close out. Go ahead, Olivier.
No, well, my point was about these sports events. Obviously, we need to build on that kind of opportunity, because it allows us to reach the young generation. And those who are, you know, watching all these soccer matches, you know, needs to be, you know, obviously explain what is going on. And I think that it's very encouraging to see that actually the Rugby World Cup was a carbon neutral 4 years ago. And it's going to be the same thing, you know, for over and over again for every single major sport event. So which means that we are making progress. It's something that is built in the business model. It's something that people know that they need to address this issue, because their customers, the people who are watching these sports events, care about these issues. So I think it's not trivial. You know, it's something that is very important, and we need to build on that kind of opportunity.
Well, one of the things that I was impressed when I was looking at the pictures of Dubai aerial photography was when it was told that, you know, when the movie, it said that nothing seems more distant from nature than Dubai, and nothing seems more reliant on nature than does Dubai. And I don't think it's just the case of Dubai, it's for all the cities. And that takes us back to the question as to what cities are doing to nature. Every one of us, we only see, I don't see very many trees here in New York, and before this I was in Nevada, so I can't complain either. But the situation is that to end things on a positive note, I would say that change is happening. And it's not like, as in the movie, it's too late to be a pessimist. I would say that the fact that PPR Group, they funded this work, it's a testimony to the fact that businesses who have the majority of the power, we all can do some things, but only few of us would be heard in what we do, especially in the global forums. And this is where the businesses can make the most mark. And we do get, every other day we get some corporation to, they visit the water center. They want to know as to how the climate is changing, how we as scientists can help them in their analyses. So I feel that corporations are increasingly taking note of all the changes that are happening, and that to us is a big feat. We are funded mostly by PepsiCo Foundation, and I myself write a lot of proposals for corporations for supply chain water risk analyses. So, so when I read at their sustainability reports and their sustainability advisement, I do see a lot of change happening, and I would like to think that things are looking up, maybe not at the pace at which we are destroying it, but we are certainly doing something towards it. Thank you.
I think this film really highlights something that actually came up in the New York Times this morning. That there was a blog post by Andy Revkin, and he was talking about how filmmaking can be motivational for getting people interested in problems, getting people interested in solutions, getting people to move forward. And I think this film very much fills that role as a motivational exercise to get people to look into more things. I think more people will remember the images than they remember the numbers. And I think the same is true. I mean, I wrote a book in collaboration with a number of photographers, and they came to me because they wanted something behind the images, something where people could look at the images, get taken by them, and then read about what that context was. And I think this film really has a good chance to do something very similar on a much larger scale.
Yeah, I like to end my presentations usually with saying that I'm an optimist, and because I feel like people like to do something that's good for the environment and good for their fellow residents. Even though they may not always be aware of the fact that they like to do good, but people find it actually rewarding, and they like to feel good about their actions. But we need to offer them rewards that are tangible and that are meaningful, and these rewards can vary from audience to audience and from actor to actor. So to identify these, we need to get to know our audiences better. And a large corporation is a very different audience from Columbia's student body. So as we study these audiences more and more, we can tailor the information. And with this movie, it starts off with all the names of the companies, the 80,000 employees who have worked on the movie, and to someone, an owner of a big corporation or a big corporation CEO will see this and will feel like, oh, there's some kind of a contagion and I want to do the same thing. To other people, this may be a total turn-off, saying like, this is greenwashing, why does this movie start with Gucci, and it may be a total turn-off. So I would almost suggest to take parts of the movie and frame them in a way that works with different audiences, so that we get their attention from the beginning and not really trying to find things that might be bad along with the movie. I'm ending with that.
Okay. Maria?
Yeah, that was I guess I didn't say that before, but that was a beautiful movie. And one of the things that I think is a challenge in this increasingly urbanized world is that many of us, and many people are growing up with no contact with nature as children. And so they don't grow up to develop an emotional connection to nature, which I think has been, a critical part of, certainly, of the evolution of humanity in the planet. So I think this movie does a great job of showing how beautiful the Earth is, and also how inextricably linked it is to human welfare. And so I think it will be a great movie to show to urban audiences. And following up on Sabine's comment, it would be a great movie to show. I was thinking of a double hitter of Super Size Me, and then this movie. Thank you.
Would you like to have the last word?
No, what I want to say is that everybody can do something. And don't wait for the politic to take decision. Don't take for the company to make the good product. Don't wait for our neighbor to do something. Do it now. I can do something myself. And I think that commitment will make you happy. And like Voltaire said, I decide to be happy is better for my wealth, pour ma santé. Décider d'être heureux, c'est meilleur pour ma santé. Voilà.
That's great. Okay, thank you very much, Yann Arthus-Bertrand and the panel. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
One of the themes that's come up in this discussion today is what can I do? And one thing that all of you can do to start with is to spread the word about this beautiful film, to encourage your friends to go and see the free screenings at Village East Cinema starting on February 4th. If any of you have the desire or ideas about screenings you'd like to arrange in a school or a university or a community center, or ideas about how we can take it to other cities around the United States, we really want this to be a moment of launch, and all of you can help us do that. So please do that. We'd like to thank the panelists on behalf of the Columbia Maison Française and the Columbia Climate Center, thank the moderator, and especially thank Yann Arthus-Bertrand for this very special event.
Thanks again to Conservation International to help us for the screening. Thank you very much. Thanks.